Welcome to the IDC Learn at Lunch. Learn at Lunch is an opportunity to get together on a monthly basis and hear from a variety of interesting speakers on a variety of topics that affect Christianity and Christian communities in the Middle East. Most IDC Learn at Lunch sessions are held live and in person at our Washington, D.C. office. And on occasion, like today, we host them as webinars. But regardless of the venue, we make them available to you through online streaming via social media and on YouTube. So thank you all for joining. Today, we're excited to hear from Dr. Robert Rabil. Dr. Rabil is a professor of political science and Middle East studies at Florida Atlantic University. He's a prolific author. His works include such titles as Religion, National Identity, and Confessional Politics in Lebanon, Salafism in Lebanon, and the Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon, and that's just to name a few. Today, Dr. Rabil will discuss Lebanon, its current multifaceted crisis, which of course presents itself on the political, economic, national security, and humanitarian fronts. He'll put Lebanon's crisis into context and tackle the ultimate question: what does the future of Lebanon hold as a bastion of Christianity in the Middle East? It'll no doubt be an interesting talk, so without further ado, it's my honor to welcome Dr. Robert Rabil.
Richard, thank you, and thanks to the IDC for having me. So I will be speaking around the 20-25 minutes, to give you, the background, what's happening in Lebanon, especially regarding the Christians and their situation. And then I will be more than happy to take as many questions as you like. So a little bit historic, issues now. Mainly Lebanon, or Great Lebanon as a country, was mainly the work of the Lebanese Christian. The Lebanese Christian lived in Mount Lebanon along with the Druze. They had a special relationship with Europe, especially with France. You had some sad events that took place, especially in the 1840 and 1860. In the 1860, you had massacres against the Christians. And after that, Europe became very much involved. And during that time, you had the establishment of what we call the Mutasarrifiyya. Mainly, what does it mean is that this is when Lebanon became governed under the Ottoman Empire according to a sectarian formula. And why I mention this? I mention this because it's paramount to understand the history a little bit. Before, in Mount Lebanon, you did not have sectarianism. The Druze and the Christian lived well. But then, things changed and you had sectarianism. Sectarianism was based on feudalism. And what happened is that, this formula became the basis of Lebanon. Why? Lebanon took its independence from the French in 1943. But before that, Lebanon became under the French mandate. After the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in 1918, France had the mandate over Lebanon. Mainly, what does it mean, the concept of mandate? That means we are going to rule you until you are prepared to rule yourself. And thus, between 1920 and 1943, it was the French that established the confessional system as we see today. 1943, Lebanon took its independence. And here, something I have to say, especially regarding the national identity. You have some parties in Lebanon, some Muslim in Lebanon, they weren't happy with Greater Lebanon. Why? Because they wanted to be part of Syria. And then they changed their mind. But mainly, you had something that was signed. It was called the National Pact. The National Pact was about, bringing the different sects, especially the Christians and Muslim, together. From the Christian side, they felt, listen, we can Lebanonize the Muslims. And from the Muslim side, they said, listen, we can Arabize the Christian. So this formula really, it worked, but up to a point. Why? Because you had a problem in Lebanon. You have questions of Arabism, especially the Palestinian questions. It was at the time the Arabic question par excellence in the Middle East, not only in Lebanon. And here Lebanon started to face a lot of problems. First problems was about the status quo because, according to the sectarian formula, to the confessional system, the Christian had wielded more power than the others. But then, they had the Palestinian question. And the Christian at the time, the Christian leadership said, listen, we cannot be involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's bigger than us. On the other hand, the Muslim camp, broadly speaking, the Muslim camp, which included, the Marxist, the party of Jean Blat, the Socialist Progressive Party, the Nasseris, the follower of Nasser, they said, no, it's our cause par excellence. And this has led to a war in 1956. Mainly, this is when United States intervened, and Lebanon true became what we call the Paris of the Middle East. But you always have simmering tension, sectarian tension, political tension. And then, the war broke out in 1975. At the time, I was 13, 14 years old. I lived along the Green Line that separated Beirut from Christian East Beirut to Muslim West Beirut. And then, I served in the Red Cross, which after that, I became the chief of the emergency along all the Green Line, mainly in East Beirut. But something happened, during the war and after the war. Here, I would like to say, and this is why history is important. As I mentioned to you before, really, Lebanese lived, you did not have a question of sectarianism. But after independence and after the emergence of mainly the feudal lord who became political lord, you have a transition. At the time, during the Ottoman time, you had feudalism based on what we call tax farming. But then what you have now after 1943 and became more deepened, and especially what I mean by deepened, it became part of the state, is that, the feudal lord became the political leader of their sects. And this is what we speak about, the transition to political sectarianism. And when we speak about political sectarianism here now, why I mentioned it? Because the number one interest for a political leader or the feudal leader is for his own interest. Second is his own sect or community, and second, the country. And this is extremely important based on my research. And now I am having a forthcoming book on Lebanon and Turkey, including Lebanon under the Ottoman Empire. And I saw it clearly. And what happened after that, really, and sadly to say, the political leaders of Lebanon or political sectarians of Lebanon, they really robbed the state. The state acted as a fodder for their spoil, really. And really, it was terrible on all sides. Now the war ended. The war ended with the Christian really did not do well. Syria occupied Lebanon. Syria, of course, helped Hezbollah more than any other country. All militias were dismantled except Hezbollah. And then, after 2005, this is when the all Lebanese came and revolted against Syria, and Syria went out. But then, when Syria went out, Hezbollah became a very, very influential power. As a matter of fact, thanks to Syria and Iran, really, Hezbollah created a state within a state. So what do you have now in Lebanon? You have a state within a state because you have the weapons of Hezbollah. And the weapons of Hezbollah, they are not to be underestimated. Hezbollah today is not a domestic player. It's a regional player. They are involved in Syria, they are involved in Iraq, they are involved in Yemen, and Iran support them. And you have some in the Arab world, what we call the Shia axis, they support them. This is one big issue. But second, and as a matter of fact, when I speak about political sectarianism, they robbed the state. And we saw that after the October revolution in Lebanon, really what happened, most of the money that you have deposited, the money of the Lebanese were stolen. And when we look at it, really, yes, you can blame Hezbollah, but also you have to blame really and accuse the highway robbers of Lebanon, who are really the political leaders of Lebanon, the political elite. And this really, the likes of which did not happen any place else in the world. You have money in the bank and your money were stolen in your bank. You worked all your life and this is what happened to you. So what do you have now in Lebanon? Really, corruption deep. Part of the corruption is on account of political sectarianism, and where the sectarian leader meet, they meet on corruption. On the one hand, Hezbollah somehow, it was less corrupt, I would say less, mainly what I mean less corrupt is that it didn't steal as much as the others, but the others gave Hezbollah the political cover. So mainly Lebanon really sadly is this place of civilization. This place is that its history has a 6,000 years of civilization really sank into a deep hole, into the abyss where today you have social issues, economic issue, political issues. Today they cannot elect a president. The country is split. And here when I speak about the Christians, and this is where, as a parent myself, and as someone, I have a sister in Lebanon. Most of my family, they are in United States, but I go there on research and I have a lot of friends. I work there. And as I mentioned to you, I serve in the Red Cross. Something about the Christians especially, and as a parent, the Christian message has always been about hope. about coexistence, about tolerance. Today, really most of the Christian, if not all the Christian of Lebanon, when they think about tomorrow for themselves, but especially, for their children, there is no hope for the future. They really, I speak with them on a daily basis. Sometimes I share their agony. Sometimes I shed a tear with them, and it's really so problematic. Really, if you want to plan for tomorrow for your son, there is no planning for tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen really tomorrow. And this is on account of, I would say, 3 factors, and every factor has a combination of factors. The first factor are the highway robber, the political elite. How you are going to the political elite? Really, are you able to go and just, remove them all from power? You have a patronage system in Lebanon. And this is some of the things that early on, as a child, as a 15 years old, I really frowned upon what I call the patron-client relationship in Lebanon, or clientelism in Lebanon. It's terrible, terrible. If you want to do something, if you don't have support from your boss or from your leader, and here when I speak about the political leader, I speak about the political sectarian leader. You go to the sectarian leader and ask him, I need a job or I need something. So really, this political elite, really, it's a big problem, and I don't know what you are going to do with it. Always my encouragement, and I've been speaking about it day in, day out, in my humble capacity, is really you need to do election. In the recent election, you have from 14 to 15-1, they broke, the sectarian line, and really they are independent. And I'm hoping that in Lebanon, indeed, you are going to have, again, a mass, I would say, revolution between quote, mainly a mass to work together to elect independent leaders and really to break this patron-client relationship that's really, I think, that destroyed Lebanon, destroyed every aspect about Lebanon. It's extremely important. Second, the second thing I think myself is the question of Islamism. And here you have 2 parts of that question. The problem first of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a big, big, big problem in Lebanon. They have the weapons. Others, they don't have the weapons. They speak about coexistence, but something about Hezbollah, they take decision without the consent of the other parties in Lebanon. And this is very, very problematic. They went into Syria. Sometimes they have, problems with Israel. So really, as a Christian or as a non-Christian, as a Muslim or the Druze who really believe in coexistence and in peace, really, you don't know about tomorrow. I myself, and I know I cannot live there. My family left Lebanon in the 19th century, myself, but many Lebanese, when they say, okay, what next? What next? So this is part of the Hezbollah. The other part are the Islamists, and the Islamist Sunni, they are split into 3 parts mainly. You have what I call the Salafism. Here I have a book. I don't know if it appears. The Salafi, they are ultra-Orthodox Muslims. Now they are split into 3 parts. The quietest, they don't involve in politics. And you can, they, of course, they like to handle their own affairs, away from everybody else. They focus on Sunnism and Islam, but they don't engage in, in conflict. They don't engage in, in war. The others, what I call the activists and the Salafi Jihadi. This is very problematic. Why problematic? Because indeed you have Salafi Jihadi, and you have a history in Lebanon. At one time, in the 2000, 2006, 2007, you had Al-Qaeda there. Then you had, during the revolution, Syrian revolution, you have a good number of Salafi Jihadi in Tripoli and Akkar, and they are against Christians, really. And I met some that I interviewed, some, in my research visit. Really, they have a vision which is totally not in tune with any other sect, Christian or non-Christian. If you don't believe like them, if you don't act like them, you are a kafir or unbeliever. So this is the second factor. So first you have the highway robbers. Second, you have Islamism. And third, and sadly, it is not spoken about much, the Syrian refugees. Now, I have to tell you something. I wrote about the Syrian refugees. I support their dignity. I am against 150% against any harassment, any violence against the Syrian. But something is happening in Lebanon, and somehow I feel that international community is not paying much attention to it. In Lebanon is a country today, less than 5 million people. You have a lot of exodus, mainly many Christians, and others they are leaving, but especially Christians. And yet you have today 2 million Syrian. So, and I went there. It's not, I don't speak, I went there. I visited over 70 refugee camps. I went on different dates, 2012, 2015, 2019. I wrote a book. I wrote other articles about it. And today what you have a huge concern. There are too many of them, and not only too many of them. Given what Lebanon is facing, an unprecedented economic and political crisis, they can't even support the Syrian. And let me tell you some of the issue, some of the what I call the daily issue, the bread and butter issue. You need water and electricity in Lebanon. You have no water and no electricity. And of course, the Syrian, they need water. So from where they get the water? From the river, from the fresh water, and then they turn it into a latrine. And here I am not blaming them because there are no water. You need electricity in Lebanon. There is no electricity in Lebanon. If you are lucky if you have 1 hour, 2 hours a day. But then, I can show you a lot of pictures. Mainly the Syrian, yes, they need electricity. So they go to the grids and they take some electricity. So here from a Lebanese perspective now, they are worried about that. Some of them are worried about being listened. We are being displaced here. We cannot afford to help ourselves. How we are going to afford to help the Syrians? And third, something really mainly it's not spoken about at all is that the Syrian born in Lebanon, the Syrian receiving I would say sometimes it's a fair amount, sometimes it's not, but they are receiving a number of humanitarian aid. And what the Syrians they are doing, to better themselves, to live better. And I feel for them, don't get me wrong. They take multiple wives and they have many children to have more money. So what happened now, you have now more newly born Syrian than newly born Lebanese. And this affecting them, and especially affecting the Christians. So really what's happening now with the Christians in Lebanon? They look and say, listen, we are really disappointed, and not only disappointed, we have been, really treated so badly by our leaders, by the political elite in Lebanon, really. Second, they say, listen, we cannot plan for tomorrow. We have the Hezbollah especially, but you have the Islamists, especially the Salafi Jihadi. They are still a threat. And third, you have the Syrian refugees. This has created an environment in Lebanon, especially the Christian. Why you are going to be there? Who is helping you? I know that United States, USAID, they help them. I know some other parties, international parties, European parties, they help them. But this help, falls short on what the Christian need. Really, the Christian needs security, the Christian need help. A Christian and non-Christians, please, most Lebanese, but especially the Christians. Why? Because they feel they are painted into a corner. They don't see, really you have hope out there, and they take it upon themselves, especially, that, their children, they need to have a better future. And they need to have not a better future, a future, first and foremost. And this is why this led now, you always have a legacy of migration, goes back to Phoenician time. And now, if you give visa to every Christian, all of them will leave. And this is a disaster. And I know that. I can give you an example. I told you that my sister is married to a Lebanese. She has 3 daughters. And mainly, I told my sister, please apply to your citizenship. You are allowed an American citizenship. She said, well, I am happy here. Then I told my nieces, I told her, listen, for your nieces, why don't you apply for the American citizenship? They said, no, we love Lebanon. We are not planning to leave. We are here. And then now today, they call me every day. They are begging me, listen, uncle, we need to leave. And I told them, listen, I told you before how I'm going to help you now. So mainly even those who are truly, very much, entrenched in Lebanese society, they love Lebanon. But today they feel that, there is no hope for them, especially for the youth of Lebanon. And this is why you have today, sadly, a mass exodus of many Christians in Lebanon. And here I spoke for 20 minutes. Richard, I'll be happy to go and elaborate on any question you have or any questions, from the audience. I'll elaborate on the questions.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Rabil. We appreciate your remarks, and it's not lost on us. We unfortunately know a lot of the grim factors affecting Lebanon today, making it an increasingly unhospitable environment for Christians to remain, as you addressed. But what I think enriched the conversation for our viewers certainly is the historical context that you provided, all the way back to the mid-19th century in Mount Lebanon, following into the 1950s with the Nazarites, and even till today through the Civil War. The first question we have is from one of our viewers, Yusuf Robinson. He asks, are there any counterfactual possibilities? So in an alternate universe, let's say, in which Lebanon could have avoided the civil war of the 1970s, 80s, and ending in 1990, which would eventually had prevented the subsequent corruption and the recent ongoing financial and humanitarian crises that ensued, that would allow Lebanon to remain its status as the Paris of the Middle East. So in an alternate universe, were there any possibilities or opportunities where all of that could have been avoided and we would have found ourselves in a very different place today?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a speculative question, and I'm not very good at speculative question. But let me tell you this. Lebanon really, as a country, one of the democratic countries of the Middle East, beside than Israel, as a matter of fact, really, it's a small country wedged between two regional countries and wedged mainly, located in a region that is fluid. So Lebanon always, as I grew up in Lebanon and I saw it in Lebanon, Lebanon was a theater for clashing ideas. Lebanon was a theater for intellectual exchange. Lebanon was a theater for markets and great trade. But also Lebanon was a theater for armed clashes. And this is something, when I look at it myself today as a historian, as a political scientist, I would say, what could Lebanon had done, to prevent all this from happening? And I say myself, even if Lebanon is democracy, I would say two things. First, political sectarianism. You cannot have a country when the sectarian leader looks first and foremost to his own interest and second to his sect. This is what I think, really. Second, the state has turned into, as I mentioned, into a fodder of spoils. Really, the political leaders, they were not true leaders. Some of them probably better than others, but all of them, they interacted with each other. It wasn't when you read about our forefathers here in the United States, when you read about Jefferson, Franklin's, and all these great people, really, when you read about the declaration, that Jefferson put out, and you say, when you read about the French, really, because, most Christians were Francophile, educated in the French system, you say, why would it not have such leaders? Why would it not have such leaders? And really, it really pains me a lot to say that, the political class, was able to create a patronage system. And in that patronage system, even my father, who worked in General Motors in Lebanon, had sometimes to go and to do the bidding of the sectarian leader of his town and of his city. So mainly the point, I would say, the number one thing that happened in Lebanon, political sectarianism, really. Second thing, I would say, if you want to kind of let Lebanon avoid all this, Lebanon from the beginning, they said, listen, we are a weak country. We are not going to be involved in all these things. Well, if you are not going to be involved, why you did not create a strong army? Really a very strong army, really. So mainly our army, yes, it was a reflection of the democracy in Lebanon, but our army and our intelligence. And at one time you had a ruler in Lebanon. He wanted to really make a strong bureaucracy. And what I mean by bureaucracy, intelligence, the army, just to protect Lebanon. We don't want to go into Syria. We don't want to go into Israel, really to protect it. Why? As I mentioned to you, all currents, Marxist currents, Nasserist currents, Palestinian currents, I still remember when I was serving in the Red Cross, Armenian currents, Japanese, you could go to Bika, you could go to some other places. Lebanon was a hot place, a hotbed of all radical, organizations. So this is again, again, the Lebanese, I think that, and the leadership of Lebanon failed, really failed big time in that, listen, we need to protect. And at the time you had a president of Lebanon, a late president that said, indeed, Lebanon was a farm. And the sad thing is that it was run like a farm. And this is what I blame. Listen, when we speak about Hezbollah, I want to tell you this. How did Hezbollah was created? Nothing is created, from a void. When we went, we said, and I still remember very well, before Hezbollah, you had the PLO. The PLO, Arafat at one time was a kingmaker in Lebanon. Why? Why they had weapons in the first place? Why Hezbollah in the first place had weapons? Mainly the weapons should be always, in the hands of the government only. So mainly you have one thing after another, and which led to this situation. So even in a speculative way, I mentioned to you two things, mainly, Lebanon, the political sectarianism, how it affected Lebanon, and the security of Lebanon. And this has led really to a farm, and really, and I'm very sad and really upset to say this. But what you have now, you have Lebanon is being run then as a farm and today as a farm.
Thank you for that. One other question coming in from our viewers has to do with the confessional system in Lebanon. For many decades, the confessional system, in theory, in principle, has been the strength of the Lebanese system. But when put into practice, we've witnessed something very different over the decades, where the confessional system essentially amounted to political sectarianism. The question is, how can the ill effects of this design be reduced and mitigated while preserving the pluralistic benefit?
Well, as a matter of fact, I thought about it, myself. You can keep the confessional system, but you don't allow the confessional leaders to use the state as a fodder for their spoils. And here, for example, let's say a Christian party won, which means it doesn't mean that you are going to go ahead and appoint your own people. You can say, listen, I'm going to appoint mainly the meritorious people. This is something how you can deal with it. Myself, really, I think that political sectarianism has to really somehow reduce to a minimum and then removed. This is the only way I can see Lebanon in the future. And I think Christians and Muslims will benefit from that. But before that, let me tell you this. The Christian and the Muslim and the Druze, they have to rally around each other. If they don't rally around each other, they are not going to accomplish anything. So mainly, again, there is another counter opinion about the confessional system. The confessional system, again, yes, the confessional leaders, they are the main problem, but also who elected this leader and who keeps electing these leaders. This is where I think that, again, civil society in Lebanon has to play a big role in that. They have to rally around the state. They have to rally around their national identity as Lebanese, first and foremost. No outside influence, whether from Syria, from Iran, or from anywhere, first and foremost. And this is something, if you can do, you can keep some of the pluralistic, even some of the, part of the confessional system in Lebanon. There is something here I would like to say, which I didn't mention, and I was in a kind of a debate, intellectual exchange. It was put on MTV and with some scholars in Lebanon. You have some Christian now. They're saying, listen, we lost hope. We want to have federalism, or we want to secede from Lebanon. This is something, really, it has been debated. I have put an article out about it. I spoke about it. And I tell him, listen, the concept of federalism is very good, but the concept of federalism include partnership. And if the Christian want to go this way, you have to find your partners. Who are your partners? First, you have to look at the Druze. The Druze now, really, their politics originate from survival politics. The Sunnis, they don't have leadership. Mm-hmm. The Shia, they are led by weapons. And the Christian community is mainly fragmented. So mainly you have a huge communal imbalance in Lebanon. And given that, it's going to be very hazardous, very dangerous, against secession from Lebanon. Who's gonna really support them? So mainly what I'm saying is that indeed you have now Christian, they are trying to see some other forms to save Lebanon. But the problem is, I think myself, the salvation of Lebanon has to come from the Lebanese coming together. And I saw that. Let me tell you when I saw that. I saw that in 2005, and I saw that in October Revolution. They came together. The first mass revolution, March 14, they forced Syria from Lebanon. The second, they worked together, one voice, really Christian and Muslim, forget sects. And then what happened is that it became fragmented. So really, even I speak about the confessional system or about any other system, if you don't have rallying, if you don't have a civil society working together as Lebanese, first and foremost, from A to Z, mainly Lebanon, I don't know what system is gonna maintain stability and hope for the Lebanese. And I feel the frustration of some Christians. And this is again, flows in, into what? Into the sea of dejection, into the sea of disappointment, of being depressed, really depressed, really. And mainly now they, at the end of the day, okay, what are my options? The best option is migration.
Thank you. We have time for probably 2 more questions, so I'll remind our audience to continue submitting them. I have a couple here on deck, but the more questions that come through, that's great as well. Next question we have is, with the Arab world potentially softening on the Bashar al-Assad's Syria, depending and possible readmission into the Arab League, what does this mean for Lebanon specifically? And would this also provide an opportunity possibly for the return of the refugees, the Syrian refugees?
Well, this is very important questions. I think myself, well, let me put it in context. First, when I look at the deal is that, yes, it's good for a detente. It's good for, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, especially vis-a-vis Syria, But you have to understand one thing. This deal or this agreement, it's not going to entail serious concessions. What do I mean by that? For example, the Iranian, they are not going to go concede and say, something, we are not going to let Hezbollah, dictate the politics of Lebanon, or we are going to ask Hezbollah to disarm. It's not going to happen, really. So my point is, yes, on the one hand, you are going to have some stability. On the other hand, let's not, expect more, from this agreements that took place. Now, regarding the Syrian refugee, it's a possibility, yes. It's a possibility that, they're gonna say, listen, probably, you have certain safe areas. We are going to speak with Bashar al-Assad. We are going to make sure that he doesn't treat them badly. He doesn't put them in jail. So this is something I have some hopes. Also, I am very cautiously optimistic. And I will very highlight, the word cautiously optimistic. Also, you can have some kind of an agreement, among the Lebanese regarding a president. Again, as I mentioned, many Lebanese, whether they are, supported by Saudi or supported by Iranian or supported by the French. So this agreement, especially, it is possibilities that, the Saudi, the Iranian, and other actors, as a matter of fact, in the region, especially UAE, they will come and say, listen, we are going to have a president. Let's have a president where the whole party agree to. But more than that, mainly, it's not going to happen. Why? Because I think Iran is not going to let go of what it called the axis of resistance. I think that agreement mainly is about the security of the Gulf, the security of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and others. I don't want to be frontline, states, especially if you have a war. You have today great power competition between United States on the one hand and the Western allies, and on the other hand between Russia and China, and they are on good terms with both, with what I call the Western camp and the Eastern camp. So they don't want to be involved. And this is part of the agreement, mainly for the Gulf, for the Arabs, to protect their security, and especially the Gulf. They have plans for tomorrow. Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto leader, he has a plan for Saudi, the 2030 vision. The UAE wants to make sure that it is really a hub of trade, not only regionally, but globally. So I put that agreement into context, and I say, one, you might find some kind of a solution for some of the refugee. You can find some sort of an agreement of a presidential selection in Lebanon. Third, you are not going to see more. You are going to see some kind of stability in Lebanon, but still you are not going to resolve the issue of war and peace in Lebanon. And why I mention that? Because that decision of war and peace is in the hands of Hezbollah. You know what I mean? So yes, you might have some stability, but the question, the political system, political sectarianism, and the weapons of Hezbollah and Islamism, I think they are going to be there. And I think those questions, yes, you could have some support from overseas, but those questions have to be resolved first and foremost by Lebanese.
Thank you. And the final question we have
Please.
is less history, less politics, and more, I suppose, strategy and possibly some military questions there. So as we know, and as you explained today, Hezbollah has been for a number of decades now, 4 decades now, been almost a cancer, a parasite in the state of Lebanon, almost can be considered a state within a state. When you expand the analogy to that of the parasite and the host, right? How can the parasite be dealt with, be eliminated even without affecting or really killing the host? As we see, in the medical analogy, that is often the case. What's the answer in this case here? Number one, and number two, when the Lebanese people, the Lebanese nation at large, is undergoing an economic and humanitarian crisis, how can that be mitigated while battling an internal parasite?
Okay, these are very good question. And here, when you were asking me the question, somehow I thought about an Armenian proverb, very famous, and usually they use it in Lebanon. And it will tell you, don't burn the rug to kill the bug. So don't burn Lebanon to kill Hezbollah, okay?
Yeah, right.
This is something. Listen, the only thing that Hezbollah, they have to have national reconciliation, and the state has to be strong. Forget the weak state. And what I mean the weak state, mainly a weak state, in Lebanon. I'm not talking to create a strong state to threaten Israel or Syria or anybody. No, you have to have, the army has to impose its authority over all of Lebanon, and it's an uphill battle. The state, now look at Hezbollah. Hezbollah did not emerge as powerful as today. It took them years and decades. Why? Other than the arms of Hezbollah, you had the social infrastructure of Hezbollah that helped the Lebanese. And why I mention that? Because the Lebanese state failed really in helping those Lebanese. And here comes Hezbollah with its social structure. So this is why, for example, Hezbollah's leaders, they are elected, and their allies, Birri, Amal movement, they are elected. Why? Because this is what I call the patronage now. Really, you need them. So here what I say is that, yes, you need a strong army, you need a strong state, but also you need a state that will extend its influence, expand in influence by what? By helping people and having a social infrastructure. That's mean, listen, I served in the Red Cross myself. When I used to go to some places in the South, you couldn't find a dispensary. You know what I mean? So really, so you had the neglect. So this is where, as a matter of fact, United States can help with that. And the international community can help with that, mainly expanding and supporting civil society organization, expanding, and supporting, the power of a state to extend its help to others. Here you have the water issue, the electricity issue, the dispensary issue, the hospitalization issues. You know what I mean? You have so many issues. It's really a big job, but you have to start somewhere. And you have also many Lebanese who live in diaspora that they have to help way more their country. So this is where Hezbollah is not a question, and I'm very realistic myself, Richard. Hezbollah is not a question is going to be resolved in 1 day or 2 days. And this is very unfortunate. Hezbollah was able to become as powerful as today, took them decades. They are dedicated and committed to their ideology, and their outlook, and it's going to take time. But I think with time, I think this is why it's so important for the Lebanese to rally together. Little by little, trust me, Hezbollah's power is not going to stay like this. They fluctuate. And in order for this to go away, gradually, they need to work together. They need to reinforce the state. They need to reinforce the bureaucracy, and they need to end corruption. And this is what I mentioned, this whole political elite, really, they have to be voted out of office. They have to be voted out of office. Now, some would say, listen, this is, you need a miracle. I'll say, listen, dedication, commitment will create miracles. You come together and you will create miracles. I have seen other countries where they were in desperate condition, and they did very well. They did very well. From South Korea to Singapore to Israel to other countries. Really, they faced such challenges, and they did extremely well. And I know that the Lebanese had the mental capacity, they have the energy, they have the ingenuity, to do all of this.
Thank you, Dr. Rabil, for this really fascinating discussion. Jam-packed, I have to say. It's so jam-packed it may warrant more than just one viewing, and that's luckily we're putting it on YouTube for anybody who wants to watch it a second time or watch it for the first time later. It'll be available to them, so we certainly appreciate that. And one thing I can say, IDC will continue to sound the alarm for the future of Lebanon through our work here in in Washington D.C. through the help and expertise of people like yourself. So we thank you very much for that. I'd like to take this opportunity also to announce that the next IDC Learn at Lunch session will take place in June. The date is to be announced, but the discussion will focus on the plight of Christians remaining in Syria since the start of the Syrian civil war 12 years ago. That'll be an in-person session at our Washington, D.C. office right here. But it will also become available online, live, so please be sure to register for that webinar. I also want to take this opportunity to plug the IDC podcast called In the Middle. Episode 4, The Trials of the First Christian Nation, will drop on June 1st. The episode will examine the history of the Armenian nation, the Armenian church, and Armenian people, and break down the current threats to its existence. So all episodes of the In the Middle podcast can be found on all major podcast platforms, Google, Apple, iTunes, as well as on YouTube. So once again, Dr. Rabil, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your expertise.
Thank you.
And thank everyone who joined us at home for this session. We hope you all have a great weekend.